Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are tackling something pretty heavy, I think. We're going all the way back to ancient Greece and diving into the world of Plato and his dialogue Parmenides.
Ah, yes, Parmenides. That's definitely a brain twister, definitely a deep dive, like you said.
Right. And the reason we're taking this deep dive is, well, you, our listeners, sent in some excerpts focusing on a particular concept that's explored in the Parmenides, this idea of the one. And let me tell you, it is a concept that can really make you question everything you thought you knew about reality.
Oh, yeah, the one is a huge one. It gets to the core of some really fundamental philosophical questions, like what is the nature of existence? How does everything fit together? What does it even mean to be something?
Exactly. So our mission today is to try to unpack some of these dense philosophical arguments about what exactly the one is and what it tells us about, well, everything.
It's a big task, but I think we're up for the challenge.
I hope so. So to set the stage, Plato drops us right into the middle of a pretty lively philosophical debate. Imagine this. Athens, during the Great Panathenea Festival. The city is buzzing with energy and excitement.
It was a huge celebration, a time for athletic competitions, religious ceremonies, all sorts of festivities.
Right, and amidst all this excitement, in walks these renowned philosophers, Parmenides, and his student, Zeno.
And of course, a young Socrates is there too, eager to test his ideas against these intellectual giants. It's important to remember that in this dialogue, Socrates is still finding his philosophical footing, not the wise sage we see in later works.
He's still got that youthful spark, that thirst for knowledge and debate.
Absolutely, he's like a sponge soaking up everything he can from these older, more experienced philosophers.
And right from the start, he zeroes in on this fascinating point. Does Zeno's argument about the many actually prove Parmenides' idea of the one?
That's a really clever question. And I think Plato uses this early exchange between Socrates and Zeno to set the tone for the whole dialogue. There's this back and forth, this intellectual sparring going on, but there's also this sense of playfulness, of camaraderie. They're enjoying the challenge of it all.
Yeah. There's definitely a sense of humor in their interactions. Like when Socrates teases Zeno, calling him Parmenides' second self. It's like he's trying to poke fun at Zeno a little, but also get him to reveal more of his teacher's philosophy.
Oh, he's definitely trying to get under Zeno's skin a bit. And it works. That little jab prompts Zeno to clarify that his argument isn't so much about directly proving the one. He's more focused on showing how the concept of the many leads to all sorts of contradictions and absurdities.
So it's like he's saying if we assume all these different things exist independently, we run into all these problems. Maybe there's a simpler, more unified explanation.
Right. Maybe all this diversity we see is just an illusion, a surface level phenomenon. And underneath it all, there's this underlying unity, this one that connects everything.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. But then, one of the key ideas that comes up in the excerpts you sent is this distinction that Socrates makes between abstract ideas and the actual things in the world that participate in those ideas.
Ah, yes. This is where things start to get really interesting. This is where we start to see the seeds of Socrates' theory of forms, which becomes super important in his later philosophy.
Right, but at this point, it's still a bit fuzzy. So can you break it down for us? Like, we have the idea of beauty, right? But then there are all these beautiful things in the world. Are those things beautiful because they somehow share in this abstract idea of beauty?
That's exactly the question Socrates is grappling with. He's trying to understand the relationship between these abstract, perfect ideas, which he calls forms, and the imperfect things we experience in the world.
So for Socrates, these forms exist in some separate realm, like a realm of perfect ideas.
Exactly. He believed that these forms, like beauty, justice, or even something like roundness, they exist in this separate realm, a realm of pure, unchanging forms. And the things we see and experience in the world, they're just imperfect copies, participating in these ideal forms.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture, but then, as you might expect, Parmenides steps in, and he doesn't hold back. He really starts to poke holes in Socrates' theory.
He's not afraid to challenge Socrates. He sees the potential problems with this theory of forms, and he wants Socrates to really think them through.
There's this one part where Socrates is trying to decide if even, and I love this phrase, vile and paltry things like mud or dirt have corresponding abstract ideas. I mean, is there a perfect form of nut out there somewhere?
That's Parmenides' genius, right? He takes Socrates' theory to its logical extreme, forcing him to confront the inherent absurdity of claiming that absolutely everything has this perfect eternal form. Like, where do you draw the line? If everything has a form, doesn't the whole concept become meaningless?
That's a really good point. It's like if everything is perfect in some way, then nothing really stands out as truly perfect.
Precisely. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. From there, Parmenides launches into this systematic dismantling of Socrates' theory of forms. He presents these really compelling arguments, highlighting all the contradictions and paradoxes that emerge if we accept Socrates' ideas as they are.
Okay, I have to admit, this is where my brain starts to hurt a little bit. Can you give us an example of one of these contradictions?
Sure. Let's take the idea of knowledge. Parmenides argues that if the forms are truly absolute and separate from the things we experience in this world, how could we ever have knowledge of them? We're stuck in this world of appearances, so how could our finite, limited minds ever grasp these perfect, eternal forms?
It does seem like a stretch, right? Like, if these forms are on this totally different level of reality, how could we ever even begin to understand them?
Right. It's like trying to describe the taste of chocolate to someone who's never tasted it before. The experience is simply beyond their comprehension.
And that's just one problem that Parmenides raises with Socrates' theory, right?
Oh, there are plenty more where that came from. He also tackles this whole idea of participation, questioning how something that's imperfect and constantly changing can participate in a perfect, unchanging form. It's a real head scratcher.
So Parmenides is basically saying, hold on, Socrates, this whole theory of forms needs a bit more work.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. But this back and forth, this intellectual sparring isn't just some abstract game. These arguments have real consequences for how we understand the world around us.
Right, it gets to the heart of what it means to be human, how we think, how we learn, how we interact with the world.
And how we make sense of our place in this vast and complex universe.
I'm starting to understand why Parmenides is considered such a giant in the history of philosophy. He's really forcing us to confront some of the deepest questions about existence.
And we're just getting started. We still have to delve into Parmenides' own ideas about the one and what it means for our understanding of reality.
Oh, I'm ready for round two. Bring on the paradoxes.
Uh-huh. All right, but let's give our listeners a moment to catch their breath before we plunge back into the depths of Parmenides' thought.
All right, so we're back and ready to dive even deeper into this idea of the one with Parmenides.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, Parmenides has just delivered this philosophical haymaker to Socrates' theory of forms, but instead of, just leaving Socrates in the dust, he kind of takes on this mentor role.
Yeah, it's like he sees that spark in Socrates, that potential, even if his current ideas need a little bit of refining.
Exactly. He's not trying to crush Socrates, he's trying to guide him to help him become a better philosopher.
So what kind of guidance does Parmenides offer? How does he suggest Socrates move forward?
Well, he gives Socrates this really insightful piece of advice. He tells him that to really get to the bottom of things, you can't just examine the consequences of a given hypothesis.
You have to look at what happens if that hypothesis is false.
Right. Don't just look at what happens if your idea is true. Look at what happens if it's not true. It's like you're testing the strength of an argument from all sides.
That's such a good point. It's like thinking about all the different angles, all the possibilities, not just the ones that support your initial idea.
And that's something we can all benefit from, right? In our daily lives, we're constantly making decisions, forming opinions, and it's so easy to just focus on the evidence that confirms what we already believe. But Parmenides is reminding us to be more critical, to consider the opposing viewpoints, to really test our beliefs.
Like a mental workout, right?
Yeah.
Pushing ourselves to think beyond our comfort zones and really examine our own biases.
Totally. And that brings us to the second part of the excerpt you sent us. The dialogue shifts gears a bit here and focuses on this exchange between Parmenides and a young student named Aristoteles.
Not the Aristotle, right?
Right, not the famous one. Different Aristoteles. But here he is, stepping into the philosophical ring with Parmenides, and they're going to tackle this question. What are the consequences of saying both one is and one is not?
So they're basically putting Parmenides' own advice into practice. They're looking at both sides of this fundamental question about the one.
Precisely. And as you might expect, Parmenides, being the brilliant logician he is, he meticulously dissects both sides of this hypothesis. And what he uncovers is a series of really fascinating paradoxes, both for the one and for everything else.
Paradoxes. Okay, now you've got my attention.
Well, for instance, he shows how the one, if it truly exists, must be both limited and unlimited at the same time.
Wait, how can something be both limited and unlimited? That seems like a total contradiction.
It does, doesn't it? But that's what Parmenides is getting at. He's suggesting that our everyday ways of thinking, our conventional logic, It just doesn't apply when we're talking about the ultimate nature of reality.
It's like those optical illusions where you see one thing, but then you look closer and it's something completely different.
Exactly. Our minds try to make sense of things, but sometimes reality is just stranger than we can imagine.
Okay, so the one is both limited and unlimited. What other paradoxes did Parmenides uncover?
Well, he goes on to show how the one must also be both in motion and at rest, both the same as itself and different from itself.
Ooh, my brain is starting to melt a little bit here.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around, but I think that's what makes Parmenides so fascinating. He's not afraid to challenge our assumptions, to push the boundaries of logic and reason.
And what's really interesting is that regardless of whether he's arguing for one is or one is not, he keeps coming back to this same conclusion. One and the other is in relation to themselves and one another. All of them, in every way, are and are not, and appear to be and appear not to be.
It's like a philosophical tongue twister, right? But I think what he's trying to say is that reality is ultimately this complex, paradoxical unity.
So it's not just a matter of things being or not being. It's much more fluid, much more nuanced than that.
Exactly. And that's really at the heart of Parmenides' philosophy, this idea that reality defies our attempts to categorize it, to define it, to put it in neat little boxes.
It's like he's saying the more you try to grasp reality, the more it slips through your fingers.
And I think there's something really beautiful about that. It's a reminder that there's always more to discover, always more to learn, always more to wonder about.
So instead of being frustrated by this lack of certainty, we should embrace the mystery, the unknown.
Exactly. Let's keep our minds open, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the infinite possibilities of existence.
It's amazing to me how Parmenides was already grappling with these really big questions about reality and knowledge thousands of years ago. It's like he was way ahead of his time.
Oh, absolutely. Parmenides' ideas, they were radical for his time, and they still have the power to really shake things up, challenge our assumptions about the world.
One of the things that I find really fascinating is how he emphasizes the limitations of our senses. It's like he's saying, hey, don't just trust what you see and hear. There's a deeper reality beyond that.
Right. It's not enough to just passively observe the world around us. We have to use our reason, our ability to think critically, to dig deeper and uncover the truth that lies beneath the surface.
He's almost saying, like, look, there's this whole other dimension to reality that you can't see or touch, but it's there. And it's essential for understanding everything else.
Yeah, it's like there's this invisible world, this realm of pure being that's hidden from our senses. And for Parmenides, this realm is the source of all truth, all knowledge, all existence.
But then that raises the question, if we can't perceive this deeper reality with our senses, how do we even know it exists? I mean, it can't just be a matter of faith, right?
Right, it has to be something we can arrive at through logic and reason. And for Parmenides, the way to access this deeper reality is through philosophical inquiry. It's through the rigorous pursuit of knowledge, through careful analysis and argumentation, that we can begin to grasp the true nature of being.
So it's almost like we're on this philosophical detective mission, using clues and logic to try and solve this cosmic mystery.
That's a great analogy. And, in a way, that's exactly what philosophy is all about. It's about asking the big questions, challenging our assumptions, and seeking out the truth, even when it's elusive.
And in a world that's increasingly dominated by technology and instant gratification, it's more important than ever to cultivate this kind of critical thinking, this willingness to question and explore.
I completely agree. We're constantly bombarded with information from all sides, and it's easy to just accept things at face value. But Parmenides reminds us that we need to be more discerning, more skeptical, more willing to dig beneath the surface and find the truth for ourselves.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Parmenides has left us with a lot to think about, a lot to chew on. And even though we've reached the end of this particular deep dive, I have a feeling his ideas will continue to resonate with us long after we're done recording.
I think so too. He's given us a new way of looking at the world, a new way of understanding our place in it. And that's something we can all carry with us as we continue to explore and learn and grow.
To all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep asking the big questions. Because that's what it's all about, right? Never stop questioning, never stop exploring, and never stop seeking the truth.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So until next time, keep those minds sharp and those questions coming.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.